Okay, there.
Welcome to the Society for American Soccer History's first Friday session for September, our third session. We started the get-together in July and a book talk with Bo Dorr in August. Founded in 1993, SASH works to promote, facilitate, and disseminate research into the rich history and heritage of soccer in the United States. I want to read that again. Promote, facilitate, and disseminate research. Well, we should add, find, or uncover, discover, unearth, whatever you want to use, to that list. Because today, we're thrilled to highlight a find that some of our members have been involved with. More on that in a minute. If you go to that second slide, Brian, you can find us on the web at ussoccerhistory.org. And please spend some time going through the site. There's all sorts of great information, from short posts to long-form research articles, Hall of Famers, to digitized reference guides. And then there's our video page, which we'll be talking a bit more today. We have over 20 videos of our talks and our presentations from various times. The behind the footage article that's also on the website is written by Society member and board member Ed Farnsworth. A special thank you to Ed for writing it up, as well as coordinating this whole rollout with the footage on Facebook and Twitter, and obviously our homepage. If you go to our next slide there, you'll see that the footage is on this SASH video page. We can see various members and others giving their talks, so you can spend some time and look there. This video from today will be on our website next week, as will some other videos long lost from 2018. My apologies, they've been on a card that I've been unable to transport, but Steve Holroyd has helped me out, and you'll be able to find those early next week as well. You can connect to us on social media, Facebook and Twitter, but then also join the Society, and you can see the Join tab and that page, next slide please, where you can join our humble but our modest Society for $20, and it will take you through there, and that is a yearly fee. And now we'd like to get to our story. Next slide, please. And the story behind the footage with Dr. Brian Bunk, a professor of history at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and our Society's treasurer. He's going to walk us through the next part of our session. Brian.
Okay. I'm going to make you the host again.
Perfect.
Okay, well, I wrote a story about this for the site, so I'm just going to kind of summarize briefly here. It all started, I guess, in the spring, and I had come across this database at the University of South Carolina that contained some newsreel films of soccer matches from the 1920s. And then Ed Farnsworth emailed me and Tom and said that he had this idea that perhaps there was some footage in Scandinavia and in Sweden in particular of the 1916 trip and the 1919 trip by Bethlehem Steel. And so he did a little bit of preliminary research and then asked me to see what I could find out. And so it took a little bit of time and a lot of Google Translate, since I don't speak Swedish, to figure out the database, get an account in the database, and finally did some searching and discovered that in fact there was footage of the 1916 and the 1919 trips both. And I also found out that it had already been digitized. So that was pretty exciting news. Then it was a question of how are we going to access this material. The Swedish Film Institute has some material already posted on their website, but unfortunately not these, you know, the ones that were important to us, I guess. And so usually you can only access audiovisual materials in Sweden and in some other universities in Scandinavia. But then because of the COVID, they had changed and were making things available remotely. And so I thought, maybe this is our chance to get the material. And it took some time, but eventually I was able to order them through the library, only to be told by the librarian that that was still, he couldn't deliver them to me remotely. So we needed to find another way. And thankfully, he suggested contacting the sales department of the Swedish broadcaster, SVTV. And I emailed them, and I got a automatic response saying that they were on vacation for the next 2 weeks. So that was a little bit of bad timing. Eventually, I waited a little bit, figuring they were on, coming back from vacation. And then finally, I emailed them a second time, and they responded pretty quickly. And then it was really just pretty easy. They quoted a particular price. We agreed to the price. And they delivered the film. So it took quite a long time. I think we first started searching in March or April or something like that. So it's been a few months that we've been working on this. So we didn't want to announce anything until we knew we had it in the bag, so to speak. So that's kind of the story of how the footage arrived here and how we gained access to it. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or you just want to see the footage. All right. Oh, I don't think I can share my screen now, Tom.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
It was pretty common at the time for British teams, English teams, who were pretty advanced and famous to travel to South America, North America, but it was, or rather, let me put this as a question, wasn't it less likely that North American team would go over there? Or was it just as common?
No, it's not. I don't think it is as common for US teams, especially in this era, to go abroad. The 1919 trip may have been the first by a US team, if I'm not mistaken. Tom might be able to correct me on that. But so yeah, it wasn't very common for US clubs to make that many trips. There are some interesting cases. There was a German club from Worcester, which is the city here in central Massachusetts, and they went on an extensive tour in Germany. I think it must have been some kind of family connections or some kind of cultural connections that made that happen. But generally speaking, I don't think US teams tended to travel as much as English teams or some other Spanish clubs, for instance, too.
Brian,
this is Peter. I have
Canada, but in 1891, a Canadian team plus some folks from Massachusetts made an extensive tour, multi-month tour of England and Scotland. And Ed Farnsworth, I don't know if he's joined the call yet, but he's done a lot of research into this. So yeah, uncommon, but there were other tours. So maybe some footage of that 1891 would pop up someday. But this is the earliest that we know of Americans, North Americans playing soccer abroad, and it's the earliest footage that Brian's been able to find and others. So exciting.
Brian, this is Peter Wilt. My question is more about the process. Do you suspect this is a unicorn, or is it the tip of an iceberg? Are there more early American soccer footage reels out there somewhere?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there is footage from the 1919 tour that we're going to try to get a hold of as soon as we can. And I think, I don't know if he's on the call, but James Brown has had found, or someone had found some footage of a tour by the Fall River Club in 1930, I think in Hungarian archives.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we have that. It's very clear footage, very crisp, good footage.
Yeah, so I suspect there probably is some more out there. We also searched the U.S. team in 1916 played in Norway as well, and we looked, but we haven't been able to find anything in the Norwegian archive. So I'm not sure that was necessarily filmed, but it's always possible. But yeah, I mean, with the footage that we discovered earlier this year in the spring, I think, you know, it used to be we had a couple of small, you know, 1 or 2 from the 1920s, and now we have probably 3 or 4 times that number. So yeah, it's been kind of a bounty year for discovering old U.S. soccer footage, that's for sure.
That's awesome. Thank you for your work on this.
All right, should we take a look at the footage, I guess?
Brian, just while this is running, can you verify which teams are? I assume, I would think maybe the U.S. is playing in white, and
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, I thought we'd watch it once, just kind of to watch it, and then, you know,
sorry.
I made a stab at trying to identify some of the players, but it's difficult, as you can imagine, so we can talk about that a little bit later.
Brian, I'm curious, this might be getting a little too far into the weeds here, but do you have any idea what the original format of this was? And do you know, it's like shockingly sharp and clear, and you know, how it was preserved. It's just like such a find for being over 100 years old, you know? Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure it was a newsreel. It was part of a newsreel series in Sweden, so it was probably originally on. I'm not quite sure what, you know, if it was 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter, or what they were shooting at that point in Sweden. And then I imagine it was just in the archives. Probably, obviously, it must have been well preserved, and then they clearly took their time to digitize it. Some of the information that we have, or some of the other footage that was recorded here in the U.S. by Fox Movie Tone, the footage is pretty bad because I don't think it was properly stored. And I was talking to the librarian there, and he was saying that in I think almost all the cases, the original film has been, you know, totally destroyed over time because of water damage or just the, you know, the degradation of the film itself. And so really these things, at least in the Movie Tone archives, survive based on transfers I think they made to VHS or something in the 80s, and now they've been digitized. So the quality is pretty poor because of the damage, and then, you know, you're what, 2 or 3 generations down. But yeah, when we first saw this footage, we were shocked at how clear and crisp and yeah, it totally looks pristine. So it's amazing.
That's the same quality as the Fall River footage. You know, it's really, really crisp and clear when you can see the teams, both teams, and then a bit of play.
We're going to ask Brian to play it again, and he's going to do his best imitation of a commentator from the early 20th century.
Oh yeah, I don't know about that, but yeah. So I tried to go. Tom has a photograph of the team, or not? Yeah, as the team as it was leaving. I think, right, Tom. And so I tried to sort of go through the footage and match up some of the players. It's really hard to see their faces clearly on the film, as you could see. And so I relied a little bit on the position that they were playing and what I could ascertain by, you know, how tall they were, their build and general hair color, style. So it you know, there's certainly a lot of room for error, but I mean, one thing we can say for sure is that, you know, George Tintle was the goalkeeper, so he's easy to identify. The Swedish keeper was described as a giant, by the way, in one of the newspaper reports, which I'm not quite clear. I think that's Neil Clark there heading the ball away, the tall guy who played in the central midfield. We also were commenting on how the goalkeepers tend to stay so deep and not right on the line basically the whole time. I think that's Thomas Swords, who just kind of went into the net. He was the captain of the team. And then I think this is Hemmingsley is the center forward, and I think he's the one who crashes into the keeper here in a second or two. Right there. And then I don't, that might be Matt Dietrichson who scores the goal, but we think that was probably chalked off because of the foul. That might be Hemmingsley again, or one of the other guys, James Ford, perhaps. The U.S. only scored one goal. It was a 1-1 tie, and the way the newspapers described the goal is that it was a beautiful pass from I think Swords to Hemmingsley, and that goal that we saw was certainly not a beautiful pass from one player to another. So that's why I think that was not the goal that was counted.
I'm impressed by the number of spectators for, you know, what was obviously a friendly tea match, and there seemed to be at least, I don't know, difficult to judge, but I would say 10,000 maybe.
Yeah, the newspaper reports put the footage or the number at 20,000, but it was in the Olympic Stadium, and the King was in attendance, so that may have driven attendance. I was reading up on the tour in the Spalding guide. They have a really comprehensive report, and apparently it was one of the Swedish officials, sporting officials, who was also a vice president of FIFA, was the one who invited the U.S. team, which is a little bit of a questionable decision considering that World War I was going on at the time, and there was, you know, submarine activity in the Atlantic Ocean. But nonetheless, they had to scrap together the team kind of at the last minute. So the international committee of the federation, the U.S. Federation, sort of handpicked the players. And almost all of them come from New Jersey and Pennsylvania. There was Swords was from Massachusetts, Dietrichson was from St. Louis, but I think almost everyone else was from Pennsylvania or New Jersey. And I guess
that's how it should be.
The newspaper in Stockholm, I guess, put up the money, or at least guaranteed a certain, you know, gate or take for the U.S. Federation. So that was partly why the trip happened, was because the newspaper basically guaranteed that they would run a profit, that the U.S. would make money on the tour.
Brian,
so that might have helped to increase attendance as well.
I'm curious, man, it seems like unlikely to near impossible that you'll ever find footage from earlier than this, correct, of the national team in any capacity?
Yeah, I mean, this was the first official U.S. men's national team match because the federation was founded in 1913. So this was sort of the first under the official, you know, blessing, as it were. I mean, there were a few other matches before this time, but those aren't counted, I guess, by, you know, officially. So yeah, it seems, I mean, there wouldn't be any more, I mean, you couldn't get any earlier footage, I guess, official U.S. men's national team footage. They played the first international against Sweden was a couple of days after this. And unfortunately, I couldn't find any footage of that match, which would have been pretty great, but.
Can you refresh my memory? When were the matches against Canada?
1894 was it, I think, or
There weren't any in the teens?
They played in the 1890s, and then I'm not sure there were too many after that. I mean, there was the Olympics, but that was not really considered to be a, you know, a regular international team. It was a college team, I think, 1906 Olympics. So.
Yeah, the very first one that I've come across is between McGill and Harvard. McGill went down, they played Harvard rules, and then Harvard went up to Montreal, and they played the Canadian rules. And it was still the time in which it was neither rugby nor soccer. It was kind of still a mixture of the two.
Yeah, the Canada game says November 28th, 1885. I guess that'd be the first one. And then again a year later, November 25th.
Okay, thanks.
So those are the photos, right, Tom? I don't know if you want to.
Yes, yeah, those are, I can explain what these are a little bit. You know, this is the photos of some of the locals, right? They traveled. Can everybody see that? The photo?
Yeah.
So these are the locals. The fellow on the right is George Tintle from Harrison. And then you have some Kearney and East Newark and New Jersey folks. So I always love to say it kind of mirrors, you know, the Tab Ramos, Tony Miola, and John Harkes, right? You have this kind of local group that has been stocking the national teams, you know, for over 100 years. Tintle was the goalkeeper. He was a fireman in Harrison. James Ford, his older brother, was the soccer coach at St. Benedict's Prep, where Tab and Claudio Reyna and Greg Berhalter all went much later. You know, that local, but you can see from their bags that this is the trip, because they traveled on the SSS Frederick VIII in order to get across the Atlantic Ocean. And yes, I mean, Brian's right, in the midst of some troubled waters across the Atlantic. And then this is either in that Kearney, Newark area before they went to Hoboken, and they left. Remember, I think the slogan was "Heaven, Hell, or Hoboken by Christmas." Right? They thought that it was going to be a short, you know, involvement in the World War. Obviously, these fellas got from Hoboken to Scandinavia and then back before U.S. involvement. But a couple people of note, right in the center in the second row, is Tom Cahill, called one of the fathers of American soccer, and was a promoter for soccer for the Spalding Company, and, you know, very much part of authoring these articles and these detailed reports in those guides, which you can find in the resources section on the SASH website. But again, as Brian said, we've done our best to crowdsource who these folks are. So there's some from New Jersey, some from Philadelphia, some from New York, but very much kind of a regional national team at this point. And then other groups would go over with, you know, folks from Massachusetts, from Missouri, and, you know, obviously over time, the national team still drawing from hotbeds, but becomes more inclusive.
Tom, may I ask, Harry Spalding, who's right there in the middle, who is that Harry Spalding? Any ideas?
I'm not familiar with him. I'm familiar more with the local guys than
Right.
I don't know if anybody on the call knows who that is.
If he's connected to the Spalding family or anything like that.
No.
But he looks quite young on the picture, so.
Yeah.
Was Harry Cooper one of the Cooper's block or whatever that you wrote about?
Not as far as I can tell, no. I looked into that. I could not, you know, link. But you do have Tom Swords, the captain of the team, is from Fall River, Massachusetts.
Yep.
And his father was playing in the very first games in the 1880s in Fall River, and was president of one of the local clubs. So that was this early American soccer family from Massachusetts. And Tommy Swords, you know, played in Philadelphia and other places, was a real kind of hometown hero who got a lot of mention in the local press.
There was, I think, a Spalding who played in the 1894 professional leagues. I can't remember if he was on the Philly team in which league, but I'm pretty sure. I don't know if that's a connection too.
There's a Charles Harry Spalding, who was an American soccer and baseball player.
That's him.
Yeah. Okay. So he's from Pennsylvania, right? And he's inducted in the Hall of Fame in '51.
Yeah, there were 3 members of this team that are in the National Soccer Hall of Fame: Spalding, Tintle, and Swords.
How about we watch it one more time and then get another round of questions, and then we can finish up for the afternoon. Let me stop my share here. And then switch you, Brian.
I see there's a couple of questions in the chat about whether the uncovering of all this historical footage is a product of increased digitization. I mean, that may be partly the case. I think, as I mentioned, in terms of the South Carolina archive, they had already begun that process, certainly by the 1980s, from what he was saying, that they were transferring that material in order to preserve it. And then I think they are, how and what their, digitization goals are, but certainly it's much more accessible than it would have been before. So yeah, I think it's probably a result of that, and more of these online catalogs and databases being searchable and accessible basically to anyone, I think is bound to increase the, these new kinds of rediscoveries, I guess. And then there was a question about what the medals that they were wearing in the photograph. They could have been given those by the Federation, maybe on the before the trip, or I don't know if it's possible that photograph was after the trip. They received medals and trophies and all kinds of stuff while they were in Scandinavia, so that's another possibility. We should also add, someone mentioned baseball. They did play baseball games there, and there does seem to be, although it might be from the 1919 trip, there is some footage of the American soccer players playing baseball. So that was another thing that they often did when U.S. clubs went abroad.
Brian, I had a question about University of South Carolina with these newsreels. How exactly were you alerted to that or knew to kind of forage through all that?
Yeah, well, I'd seen a tweet that someone had sent about footage of a tennis player from Spain named Lily Alvarez. And I used to be in a previous, my previous research life, I was a historian of modern Spain. So I always have kind of an interest in Spanish stuff. And I knew who Lily Alvarez was. So I was curious about that. And then, so I went to see the footage and I thought, oh, here's the database. Maybe they have something on soccer. So I just plugged in soccer into the search box and the stuff turned up. So I often do that if I come across a database that I'm not familiar with or that I've never used before. I'll sometimes just randomly search for that kind of stuff and see what comes up. So
is this how often you discover things almost by chance?
I would say, only a handful of times have I gotten lucky, shall we say. Yeah, okay. It doesn't happen very often. There's a lot of, negative results, but then occasionally, like I said, it happens. And I mean, I found some other footage from 1930, again, same way, just a kind of random search in a database that I wasn't familiar with before.
Thanks.
This club, by the way, we tried to find out some information about it. I think it was originally from a particular neighborhood in Stockholm, but they seem to have merged with another club sometime in the 1920s, and then they merged again with some other clubs in the 1960s, and then merged again in the early 2000s. So there is, I think, some version of this club still survives, but it doesn't, I don't know enough about Swedish soccer history to say anything more definitive about it.
Brian, can I ask you if you have any other ideas as far as the collection in South Carolina? How did they ever get I mean, obviously not this one, because obviously this comes from the Swedish one, but the other material in South Carolina, why did it end up in the movie image research collection in South Carolina, of all places? Do you have any idea on the backstory?
I don't know why that library has it. It's the Fox Movie Tone newsreel collection. So, you know, it must have at some point been deposited in the archives there. You know, how or why, you know, those things are often random, or, you know, seemingly random, but yeah, so the soccer stuff is part of a much bigger archive of newsreel footage that contains all sorts of stuff from around the world. Found some really interesting footage about this revolt that happened in 1934 in Spain that I had written a book about, and I had never seen newsreel footage. So that was kind of cool. So there's a lot of stuff in there. In addition to the soccer, it's just part of a bigger newsreel collection.
Brian, there is a comment from Peter Legge in the chat, if you want to address that on the Swedish archives. And then if we, after that, if we can have a comment from Kurt Rausch, who says he possesses a medal that Neil Clark was awarded from this trip.
As far as other footage, I don't know. I mean, I think maybe part of the reason why this match was filmed, it was the first one and the King was there. And so that might have been why the cameras were on this one and maybe not on the first international match. As I said, I think it's part of a bigger collection of, you know, just like a newsreel that we've probably all seen, where there's like a minute of this thing and then they go to some random, you know, tugboat race, and then they go to some flower show, you know, so it's spliced together little snippets, and this was probably part of something like that would have been like a weekly newsreel that I'm sure was probably shown in theaters or something like that. So I don't know, have a sense of, you know, how much other kinds of footage there is. There is more. I did search using the generic, you know, Swedish term for football. So they do have other footage, just none, I mean, except for the 1919 trip, none from other American matches that I could find.
Yeah, hi. This is Kurt Rausch here, and yes, I do have in my possession a medal from Neil Clark that was awarded for this competition, and I would, you know, gladly provide some pictures if you want to put it on the SASH site accompanying this film. That might be another good addition.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. Well, that might help if we could compare it to the medals that they're wearing in the photograph. We might have a sense of when that photograph was taken, either before or after they went on the trip.
Describe the medal, Kurt.
Around the size of a $50. It has a picture of the Swedish flag and the American flag on it as well, and soccer ball on the front. I can, you know, as I said, you know, provide any pictures to anyone if they want to see it. But it's a nice medal. It doesn't have the, you know, the fabric portion on top of it. It's just a medal. And as seen better days, it's pretty worn out. So someone was handling it a lot.
How did
and
you
actually
acquire it,
in
Kurt?
touch with some relatives. Pardon me?
I'm sorry, Kurt. How did you acquire the medal?
Private auction many years ago. I've actually been in touch with some relatives of Neil Clark too over the years. I've done some research for other things on him, and actually the family was interested in getting it back. So I have a little quandary there.
But go ahead, Kurt. You make a case for Neil Clark to be a member of the National Soccer Hall of Fame. He is a winner of winners. So give your plug here. He is not a member, so give your plug.
Yes, I mean, if you look at any of the great teams at the time, he has played on the Brooklyn FC team. He played for West Hudson's. He played for Tacony. He played for Bethlehem Steel, Fall River Rovers. He's won numerous National Challenge Cup medals, AFA Cup championships. He was on the Robbins Dry Dock team, played in American Soccer League. He's a international, so he has many of the boxes checked for, I guess, what would consider someone up for election today. And he has also the pedigree over in Europe. He was associated with Glasgow Celtic and Belfast Celtic, and actually at one point was offered some jobs with some of the English FA teams. So he has definitely a star-studded career, won many championships, and as there was at some point talk that that he, out of every medal that could have been won during that period, he was one of the few guys that had won just about all of them. So I definitely think there's a good argument for him to be in. That's it.
Brian, any parting shots on your find and what's coming next?
No, I mean, like I said, it's partly it was Ed Farnsworth who had the original idea, and then it was, I just tracked it down and arranged for us to get the footage. So yeah, I mean, hopefully more of this kind of stuff will come out as we've talked about, with more archives being digitized, with more databases being available. Hopefully more of this kind of thing will come up.
Any parting shots from other folks before we conclude?
Does anyone know what Diedrichson was doing on the team, being from St. Louis?
Well, I mean, it says in the Spalding Guide, as I think I mentioned earlier, that they had to do it very quickly, so they decided there was not time to have tryouts. And they do say that there were a lot of people from the Western region who wanted to be included or who wanted to be considered for the trip. But then they just, like I said, kind of had a committee that picked the people. And I don't know how he ended up on that list when other people from St. Louis probably could have been picked as well. I don't know where he was playing in 1916. Maybe he was playing in the East Coast somewhere at that point. I don't know enough about it, or enough about his career to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have some information on that too. In my paper that I wrote on Samuel Bustard, I came across a couple other St. Louis folks that were supposedly offered by Tom Cahill to be on the team, but they declined. And I think I also saw a while back that Diedrichson might have been asked after H.H. Shanholt turned down an invitation locally. So a couple people obviously had declined some invitations. That's it.
That's interesting.
Had St. Louis roots, right? He was based in St. Louis, grew up there, played many sports there, and then came out east as a representative of the Spalding Company.
Right. It's interesting that people had turned down, because in the Spalding kind of summary of the tour, they make it sound like they had to pick people instead of having tryouts, but the team they ended up with was probably as good as one that they would have gotten if they'd had full tryouts. So it's interesting that it wasn't, they weren't the first choice in some cases.
All right, we've done enough with this today. You know where to find us. You can ask questions, but thank you for joining us today on this historic occasion. Kudos to Brian and to Ed. and that, you know, wonderful feeling of unearthing a gem. You know, all researchers yearn for that eureka moment, or finding that nugget in a dusty archive or an online repository. So congratulations to them, and thank you for sharing it with the society, its members, and others. And a special thank you to Ed for organizing this rollout. So here's to finding more, many more, and to, you know, what else is out there. And before we wrap up, just a brief word on our next several First Friday SASH sessions. We're going to be available at some point every first Friday of every month. A book talk by Gabe Logan on his book on Chicago soccer history is in the queue, as well as documenting club history with Bob Gansler Jr. of the Milwaukee Bavarians, David Kilpatrick, New York Cosmos, and a fellow from Fall River, Fall River, Massachusetts, doing the Fall River Marksman, Derek Gonzalez. The three of them will talk about doing club history. And then Society board member, Patrick Salkeld, putting together a forum on regional soccer history. So stay tuned in the following months for those first Friday SASH sessions. Say that 10 times fast. But thank you very much for joining us. You know where to find us on the internet and on social media. So thank you, Brian. And
Good night, everyone.
Yeah, great job, everybody.
Well done, well done.
Thanks.
Mhm.
That's a great surprise. What a great session.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
and see you guys next time.
all right. Well done, Brian. Thank you.
I made you the host again.
All right. Cheers.